Hello everyone, I welcome you back to another important lecture. And for today, we are going to look on toward the past paper questions from the topic diffusion, and that is a part of the chapter movement of the substances. And we know it very well that diffusion is a mechanism or a process where the particles they would move from their higher concentration where they are available in more number to their lower concentration where they are available in their less number, and that too down the concentration gradient. And we know it very well that this process is a passive process. There is no need of energy requirement for this process to happen. So let us see that how come the questions they have arrived from this diffusion topic in the recent past paper. If we were to look on toward question number one, and this happened to appear in the May June of 2015, and here they say is that some plants they can be grown in water using the technique of hydroponics. You may have looked at somewhere on the social media that in some scenario we don't need to be using the soil, but only the water is required, and in the water the roots of the plants they are immersed, and that solution in which the roots they are being immersed, so it has got the ions, and the ions concentration is kept at such a concentration that it would ensure the maximum growth of the plant. They say some ions can be absorbed both by diffusion and the active transport. So if I were to just simply show you the diagram, so if I were to take some, you could say pot, and in the pot I would simply add the water, and that water would have a correct concentration of the ions. And for the plant that I am required to be growing, so we would simply would cause its roots to be getting immersed here, and they say that the ions from this solution it would be absorbed by the plant roots both by the diffusion and the active transport. Now he has asked you a question for the total of 2 marks where he wants you to be stating two features of the diffusion that do not apply to the active transport. Actually, the diffusion and the active transport they go opposite to one another. The diffusion would move the particles from the higher to the lower concentration. Active transport moves it from the lower to the higher concentration. Diffusion would never require the presence of the carrier proteins, but the active transport would require them. The diffusion does not uses energy, so this is the passive process. And the active transport uses energy which is released from the mitochondria by the respiration. So the active transport is an active process. So I have written 4 points. You can write any two. You would write in term of diffusion that this is passive process, and the particles they move down the concentration gradient. If you forget these 2 points, so you would say that for the diffusion, no carrier proteins are required or involved, and the substances they move down the concentration gradient. Moving onward for the second part, they have said and explained how the roots they are adapted to be absorbing the ions. So now since they are asking the adaptation of the roots for absorbing of the ions, so we know it very well that the roots they have got the root hair cells in them, and those root hair cells they would for sure increase the surface area to the volume ratio for the absorption of ions. And at the same time the roots we know that they continually try to grow into the soil at a greater distance so that it can find new sources of the water. Other than that, you could say that the roots, since they have the root hair cells, so they have got the presence of the carrier protein, and that allows them to be absorbing the ions. If we were to move on toward the next question that appeared in your May June of 2016, and the variant was 4.3. They say we have got the student and they investigated the diffusion of the substances. Now here we have to be focusing is that they are determining the diffusion of the substances, and that is actually being done through a whisking tubing. And in the biology experiments, the whisking tubing basically acts as an artificial membrane which has the properties as of the cell membrane, and that we have to perceive is that these whisking tubes they would be acting as a partially permeable membrane where they can control the entry and the exit of the substances. Now what they have to tell us is that the student they made a bag of the whisking tube, and they are showing you in figure 4.1. Now if you were to look this diagram, So you see that we have got a top of the plastic syringe, and at the end of the plastic syringe, they have attached the whisking bag. They have placed a knot at their end, and then they actually tighten it up with the help of this elastic band. Now, if you were to see further, what the students here are doing is that in this whisking bag, they are filling it up with the help of the starch solution, and they place this, you could say, whisking bag that is mounted to the top of the sink. Now they are taking it into the test tube of the water. So if we just see, you have to basically assume here is that this whisking tube, this has got the starch solution, and now we have got the surrounding test tube, and this surrounding test tube, this has got the water in it. But as of the work statement, we need to be binding to this concept of the diffusion of the substances. But if we were just to move further, they say the student they added some iodine solution to the water in the test tube. So this water that we have got in them, they are adding the iodine solution. And we know that the iodine solution, whenever this would come in contact with the starch, so it would turn the color to black. Now, what they have to tell us further is that after 30 minutes, when they kept this at a room temperature, so the content of the whisking bags, they were stained blue-black, but the water outside remained yellow color. So you see that they are not asking us with respect to the osmosis, but rather than we have to speak in terms of the diffusion of the iodine or the starch solution. Now, considering the fact that the iodine solution this was available in the water which is surrounding the whisking bag, so here the concentration of the iodine solution is higher, and within the whisking bag we do not have any iodine molecule as of now, so here the concentration of the iodine is lower. So as a result of that, the iodine molecule they would diffuse from the surrounding water into the whisking tubing, and at the same time the size of the iodine molecule this was small enough that it allowed them to diffuse on the inside of the whisking bag, and where they would come in contact with the starch and it would change their color, and the iodine would change its color to the blue black. But why the surrounding, you could say, water, it remained yellow? The reason is because starch, we know, this is a complex sugar. This is a polysaccharide. So starch is large enough that it would not be able to cross the membrane of the whisking bag, and ultimately it cannot diffuse or it cannot move into the surrounding water. So that is why these contents on the outside of the whisking bag, they do not change color, but rather than here, since iodine has moved on the inside, so now it would turn blue black. So now they have asked for the total of 4 marks that we are required to be explaining the result as I have explained. So now you just need to know the wording. We would say that the iodine molecules are small, so that is why they would move from the water in the surrounding test tube into the whisking bag, and that would be done with the help of the diffusion. And that is why they would stain the starch and its color would turn blue black. But if we talk on the other way around, the starch which was available in the whisking bag, so this was large, and that is why it cannot diffuse or it cannot pass out of the whisking tubing into the surrounding test tube, and that is why the color of the water on the outside this would remain yellow color. If we were to move toward the second part for the total of 3 marks, they are asking that we are required to state 3 factors that influences the movement of the molecules through the membranes. So you would say that this is a temperature because more temperature there is, so more movement of the molecules there would be through the membranes. The other thing is the surface area. We have the greater surface area, so it would allow for the greater movement of the molecules. And the third could be the size or the type of the molecules. Because if the size of the molecule is enormous, so ultimately they cannot move through the membrane. But if their size is small, so they can move through the membranes. The other alternative point that you could write instead of the size, so this is the type of the molecule. And why the type of the molecule is important? The reason is that some of the molecules, like the charged particle, as we have the ions, so they cannot pass through the membranes, rather than they require some channel or the carrier proteins. But if we have got some non-polar or non-charged particle, then ultimately they are in the position to be crossing these cell membranes that we have with us. Moving on, the next question, again from the same topic. And this came in October, November of 2021. The variant for your theory was 4.1, and this was question number 1B with us. And here they say is that we give you figure 1.1, and this is a micrograph of the part of some fish gills. So we see a lot of fish gills here, and if you were to see, they have got a lot of tiny projections. So this means that here the surface area of these content is greater, and they would also be very thin because this is a very higher magnification which they have shown you. So they are asking is that the fish kills they are adapted for the gas exchange by diffusion. And for the total of 2 marks, they want us to be defining the term diffusion. And we know in diffusion, the particles they would move from an area where they are in more number or they are in their higher concentration to that area where the particles are in lower number or in lower concentration. And that basically is done down the concentration gradient, and we are not in the need of any of the energy. So that is why we can also write the word passively here. Now, for 1 mark, they have asked that you are required to be suggesting one adaptation which is visible in figure 1.1 that would show that the fish gills are efficient structures for gas exchange by diffusion. So either you could say that they have the large surface area, or you could say that these fish gills they are thin. So that would allow for the efficient exchange of gases by diffusion for this fish gills which they have shown us. I hope you people would have got some good idea of that how come the past paper questions they can come from the diffusion topic in your final exams.